As we read Ezekiel chapter 36 concerning Israel rising, we have read the prophecy's detail, we have scanned history, and have noticed a trend of what happens to the land with and without Jewish sovereignty. We have viewed the old photos that give credence to the eyewitness accounts throughout the centuries. Through visual comparisons, we have seen how dramatically the land has changed since Israel became a nation, just as the prophecies have foretold. No other people group or national homeland in history can compare to this experience. These unique circumstances that coincide with Ezekiel 36 lead us to one of two conclusions. Number one, this is a wild and compelling coincidence that is an anomaly in human history. Or two, something supernatural or divine is at work behind the scenes. While this conclusion may be solely the decision of each person beholding it, all these events are clearly linked to the prophecy. In fact, if we look back at Ezekiel 36 passage, it appears that God said he would take personal responsibility in this process and explained exactly what he would do. It says in verse 9 that he will turn towards you, the land and the people. In verse 11, he says he will multiply man and beast on the land. In verse 12, he says he will cause Israel to walk the land and take possession of the land. In verse 15, he says he will not let the insults towards the land continue. And in verse 23, he says he will sanctify his name among the nations as a result of this whole process. In verse 24, he says he will gather Israel from the nations and bring them back to their own land. And in verses 26 and 27, it says he will give Israel a new heart, a new spirit, and bring a cleansing. He will not bring a famine on the land, it states in verse 29. And in verse 30, he says he will multiply the fruit of the trees and increase of the fields. Moving into verse 33, it says he will enable Israel to rebuild and dwell in the cities. And in verse 37, he encourages Israel to ask him to do all of this. And for many of these points, we have seen the beginnings of the tangible fulfillment in the work that we're putting forth for the return Israel. Some points are more difficult to quantify. But yet, regardless of where we are in this whole process of restoration, one thing is clear. Something miraculous is happening. When viewed through the eyes of history, Ezekiel 36 tells us that when these changes start happening, God is the one doing it. And by the end of this prophecy, God clearly explains why he is reviving the land. They will say, quote, "This land that was laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. The cities that are lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited. Then the nations around you that remain will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt what was destroyed and have replanted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it." In Ezekiel 36, verses 35 and 36. If God's original everlasting covenant with Abraham regarding his chosen people is still valid, the land will give testimony to that as well. No other group of people in human history has been planted on a piece of land, forcibly removed, then returned after 70 years to the same piece of land, then forcibly removed again and scattered to the ends of the earth for 2,000 years, then return a second time to the exact same piece of real estate as an identifiable people with the same customs, language, and beliefs as their ancient ancestors. And all the while, their homeland ceased to produce until their return. If God's covenant promise to Abraham and Ezekiel's prophecies are to be believed in a literal way, then through this land's miraculous transformation, we are beginning to witness one of the greatest demonstrations of God's faithfulness to his promises in the last several thousand years. The prophecy states that at some point, The land's transformation will be so stunning in the scope of its history that the nations will recognize that only God could have done it. And according to the scriptures, he is calling the nations to himself, and he's using the land of Israel to do it. And it's happening right now, right before our very eyes. It is not simply the land whose revival was foretold, but the people as well. 3 times in Ezekiel 36, the idea of a national cleansing is connected to the return of the Jewish people to their land and the physical renewal of the land itself. In fact, many times throughout other prophetic scriptures, when the return of the Jewish people to the land is mentioned, so is the arrival of the Messiah, who will bring about a restoration to God. The unveiling of the Messiah in Jerusalem is faithfully expected by both Jews and Christians. At the end of this passage, there's a connection between a cleansing and the land becoming like the Garden of Eden again. The garden was not simply a beautiful place, but a special place where God dwelled with man in his sinless state. Verses 24 and 25 state that he will gather the people back from the nations to their own land, and then the cleansing comes. If the people are returning now, and the land is physically responding as well, then the Messiah and the cleansing are not far behind. Regardless of our personal beliefs, history has shown us that what is happening in Israel has never been seen before. God is faithful to his people, this land, and to the people and nations that recognize his hand in these amazing transformations. We are watching Ezekiel's prophecy coming to pass in its fullness. This land that was a wasteland has become like the Garden of Eden. The waste, desolate, and ruined cities are fortified and inhabited. Ezekiel 36:35. To learn more about this transformation that's taking place in Israel and the Return Israel, go to thereturn.org. Learn all you need to know to join us in prayer, support, and all the things that the Return Israel is now taking to the land. Join us as an ambassador. Come to Israel with us. Go to thereturn.org and learn all you need to know, and join us there. Many blessings.